Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. Today I am joined by a returning guest. Last time we spoke, she had just been named the RNA's Literary Agent of the Year 2021. It's Blake Friedman's Vice Head of Books, Juliet Pickering. Hello, welcome back.
Hi there. Thanks so much for asking me back.
No, it's such a pleasure to have you on. So when last we spoke, I noticed this as I was having a look on the website. I don't remember your title being Vice Head of Books.
Oh, that's interesting. I've got no idea when I became Vice Head of Books. I will say it's an empty kind of title, really. I think it's just a sort of gratuitous, oh yeah, you do all right in the book department, have a Vice Head kind of title.
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, it means that I just help my colleague Isabel look after everything bookish at the agency and strategizing and all that exciting stuff.
Oh, okay. So it's not like it comes with a whole new set of responsibilities and job stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely all of that, loads of new responsibilities. No, it's just a version of what I already do with extra title added on. And to be absolutely honest, I completely forget about it. I've never been someone to put my job title and my email signature or anything like that. And ultimately, I'm an agent, and that's where I begin and end. So yeah.
Okay, right. So you still very much identify as Juliet Pickering, literary agent.
Yeah, I would add the words Her Majesty. Juliet Pickering,
right, sis.
Yeah. I have earned those, of course, yeah.
Yes, as I mentioned, last time we spoke, 2021, which feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it does.
So something I'd love to ask, as someone inside of publishing, do you feel like over the past few years, there have been many big shifts within the industry, and kind of what are the biggest ones that you've kind of felt or been affected by?
Yeah, I think probably the ones that have been felt most keenly in the last year or so are lots of buying up of smaller publishers by groups like Hachette and Penguin Random House. So, for example, when I submitted a cookery book to editors, even this time last year, but definitely this time a couple of years ago, I would have had quite a wealth of editors to send it to. But so many of those little independent cookery publishers have been snapped up by groups, HarperCollins, or as I said, Penguin Random House, like Dorling Kindersley has gone. They've acquired an independent publisher recently, and HarperCollins bought Pavilion, that are kind of options as agents in terms of submitting a book to lots of editors have really shrunk. And it feels like some of the imprints within those big corporate groups who were publishing cookery are now retracting that because it's such a high kind of expense endeavour. So it does feel like the industry has weirdly both grown and shrunk. Shrunk in terms of our opportunities, sadly, I think, a little bit, but grown massively in other respects. And obviously we're seeing big boom in fantasy publishing, and lots more publishers get involved in that area where perhaps they weren't quite so overt about it before. They didn't have kind of the relationships with book subscription endeavours and things like that they have now. So as always, I think there's a little bit of shrinkage, there's some growth. You see these things happen all the time, but it's just, as an agent, you fear that when it affects your authors personally.
Yeah. So when you say that lots of the smaller imprints are being bought by the bigger imprints, I mean, in some cases, that doesn't change a lot mechanically. They sometimes just continue the imprint running as per. Does that mean, if you're saying there's less opportunity, does that mean that a lot of the time they're sort of taking these imprints and then folding parts of them away and then moving editors out of those imprints and into different places?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect us because I think editors and the people that publish our books around those editors, so publicists, marketing, sales, all of those, it will affect them and their jobs quite a lot of the time. You'll see lots of reassurance that nothing will change as the event unfolds and as it's made public. And then, after a couple of years, you may only have a few people from the originally acquired publisher left. And sometimes they've gone into other places, which is great and good for them. But when you have authors with those publishers, it can leave them a bit stranded or a bit orphaned, particularly if their original champion, like the acquiring editor who bought their book in the first place, has had to go or move on. Then you can really lose that kind of person who is really elevating your book in every kind of publishing meeting, every planning meeting. You need that champion in-house to really get your book sold. And sometimes an editor change can be absolutely fine. That new editor is really invested. And sometimes it can be really tricky because that's perhaps, the books that they're taking on perhaps aren't their own heartland, so they don't feel as connected to them.
Yeah. I know that with authors, it's often a big, something that they're kind of worried about is if the person that commissioned the book is not the person that edits the book. That can be a scary thing because obviously the person that commissioned it loves it and you don't know as much how the other editor will feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens all the time now. I mean, when I started agenting, editors probably held on to their roles for longer before they might move around. But it's not unusual for an editor to just work somewhere for a couple of years and then move on. And it's totally understandable. Like, they've got to do the best of themselves in their careers, but it can be very gutting for an author. And I've had several authors who've sort of been acquired in great excitement by an editor, only for the editor to then kind of turn around and say, well, actually, I'm going. And that's quite soul destroying for a while, because you just think, wow, we had such energy around this acquisition and now you're moving on. What does that leave us with? But it's just part and parcel of the process of being published these days. You just have to sort of get on with it, meet the new editor, have that conversation, or the new publicist or whoever it might be, and hope for the best, really.
Yeah. And like you said, a lot of the time that works out and the new editor is also really excited. It's, it might be slightly different than how it would have come out with the previous editor, but it still comes out really good and it kind of is a success nonetheless.
Yeah, and you have to hope that the publisher has hired everyone under its umbrella because they're good at what they do and they will publish well and they will look after their authors or, run a great campaign or make sure the book's sold into Waterstones or whatever it is that they do. So, yeah, of course, there has to be a certain amount of trust in everyone around the book, not just the main editor.
Yeah. And in terms of, you mentioned that it doesn't necessarily affect you as a literary agent and sort of that part of the industry, but has the pipeline between you as an agent discovering a new writer, signing them, and then taking them out to editors, has that pipeline had to change because of shifts in the industry at all?
Not really, I don't think. I mean, I think the main way it's changed has just been some newer people coming in and perhaps my not having known them previously. I mean, usually when I submit books to editors, I know the editors at least a little bit. We will have met somewhere along the way. I think that is something that COVID changed as well, was that, everyone was kind of meeting in person a lot of the time. So even if you didn't have a book to send an editor at that particular moment, you were making the introduction, you were saying hi, you were going for coffee, you were having lunch, you were meeting at a kind of agent-editor mixer, and you were introducing yourself and your books properly. And so you felt that when the book was sent out, that editor knew who you were and what the book was about. And I think that's changed a little bit just because people are less likely to go out and mix quite so much. I think that's, coming back, and that's great. And also in this kind of new age of hybrid working, which is really welcome and really positive, it's understandable that you cross paths with people less because they're all over the country, and that's a great thing. But it just feels like maybe it's a little bit harder sometimes to have that personal connection to an editor as an agent that you would really like to have before you put a book in their hands. But that's not insurmountable either, and I'm not kind of just starting this whole podcast off being extremely negative at all. That's not what I want to do. It's just you asked what was different, and I think that is one of the things that has changed in the last few years. Not for the worse necessarily, but just to say that it's great when you know an editor a bit more fully. When you put the book into their hands, you know that you can trust them with it.
Yeah.
And also sometimes you do have a sense of whether they're going to be sticking around or moving on quite quickly as well.
Yeah, I guess just having a personal connection, it adds a certain, I want to say a layer of protection, but like there's a certain level of safety that I guess that you feel once you've met someone and you've kind of shaken their hand or you know them in person.
Yeah,
there is something unspoken about it.
And also there's, as with everything in agenting, there's your gut instinct. And sometimes I meet people and I'm like, you might be great for someone, but I'm not going to put my authors into your hands.
Right,
very rarely. But here and there you just think, no, I don't think I want you to work on my books. And sometimes that's just because you see all these flags that suggest that you as the agent are going to be doing an awful lot of side care of the author because the editor may be a bit AWOL or may not be so attentive. So sometimes the in-person meetings can really help with that instinct of like, how will this editor be with my authors and how much will I have to help with the relationship or not? And ideally an editor should be so good at communicating with the author that you don't have to keep kind of stepping in and encouraging that conversation. But often as agents, we do have to do that. And it's easier when you trust the person on the other end of your email who will immediately step up and be like, yeah, of course, let me raise that with your author and we'll talk about it.
Yes. Okay. That's interesting. That's I think a side of editorial and agency that doesn't really get talked about very often.
Well, the communication between
the agent and the editor.
The editor, yeah.
Well, I guess the author and the editor via the agent in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the degrees to which agents are involved vary so hugely.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by it. And I think I err on the side of probably too involved. sorry to editors. But yeah, I was speaking to an editor a little while ago who published one of my author's debut novels last year, and she hired a freelance publicist on it. And apparently the publicist said to her, was Juliet always this involved? Like in a slightly tetchy way. And I was like, well, I'm just looking out for my author. It's not that I don't trust the editor because she's brilliant, or I don't trust the people around here who I'm sure are doing a great job. It's just at the end of the day, I don't want my author to turn around and be like, oh, if we only could have asked that question halfway through, or I didn't realise I could have had that done for me by my publisher. And I just want to make sure that my authors feel kind of fully looked after in that respect. And also editors and their teams are understandably incredibly busy people who have an increasing amount of overwhelming tasks to do. So it's understandable that sometimes, they might or might not need me weighing in to ask, has this been done? Or could we do this? Or, that kind of thing. I think it's really important.
Yeah. And especially for a debut author who maybe doesn't, have any experience with publishing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, speaking to my friends, on my other podcast, we recently did a run of episodes where we basically went through my friend Naomi and Melissa, who have both published multiple novels each, and they were basically talking about their experiences, what they did know or didn't know when they first published versus how they approach, speaking to an editor, speaking to their agent, speaking to whoever it is now. And it's just totally different. And that there's so much of a sort of them saying like, I wish I knew what I know now when I went through the system the first time. Yeah,
exactly that. So particularly for the authors that I've picked up who've been represented before or had a publishing career before I've come to them and perhaps worked with them several books down the line, you have such a singular experience as an author with your agent that perhaps you've never deviated from. You've always been with them. Or with your publisher. And obviously it's more common these days to move around publishers and experience different kinds of processes there. But, I've had authors who I took on latterly sort of said to me, "Oh, I've never had my agent in the room on a campaigns meeting before." And to me, that's absolutely crazy. Like 6 months out from publication, you have a sit down with the publisher and you will discuss what's going to be done for the book. And why on earth wouldn't I be there? Like, I'm part of the process, but I'm also part of the following 6 months where I check in with the publisher and say, "Oh, we had this great idea in that meeting. Has anything been done about it? Or have you sent the book to that book club or that bookstagrammer that we raised in the campaigns meeting?" And, I'm never going to be relentlessly on their backs annoying them, because I don't want the relationship to be antagonistic, but I want to just gently kind of check in along the way and make sure that they're fulfilling what they've promised in that meeting. So yeah, an author's experience of agents and, of course, then editors and publishers varies hugely. And I just like to be present. I think that's important.
I think that's great. And I mean, I think that's probably what an author ideally would have, more people on sort of, I don't want to say their side, because the editor and the publisher is also on their side, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Someone who's sort of on their side of the career, as opposed to just this one book, always kind of with them as much as they can and kind of fighting their corner. Because in many ways, being a literary agent is just being the biggest sort of cheerleader and person fighting for the author outside of the author themselves.
Yeah, and you have to be the kind of constant, because the editor might change, or the publicist might change, or the marketing person might change. So if you are across it as the agent, that helps hopefully kind of keep things running more smoothly, so that you're in on those conversations and you're aware what's going on. So when things change around a publishing process, then you're at least there to say, "Okay, don't worry, new marketing person's great. We can continue the campaign just as we planned." So it just helps to fill in the gaps as well, as and when they might happen. Yes.
Yeah, indeed. And okay, maybe we can talk about, I think, something that's maybe a positive thing that's happening within the industry is, and it's been growing for a long time now. It's not a new thing to say, but digital publishing, I feel like now is as big as it's ever been, and it doesn't show any signs of stopping. And audiobooks kind of alongside that too. Is that something that has much more importance now, I think, in terms of the rights and the sales than it used to?
It's an interesting question, because I think for the books that I work with, in most cases, digital publishing has actually offered some opportunities in translation markets that weren't there before. But for the UK, US market, probably doesn't feel that different a few years down the line. So, for example, a couple of my it's very kind of generally called women's fiction, ridiculous name for it, but I guess romantic fiction, right? A couple of my authors who write romantic fiction, who are incredible and have had a few sort of translation sales into print in Europe. There was a digital first publisher set up in Denmark called Jentus, and Denmark has had a very kind of sudden and kind of swell in romantic fiction reading, partly, of course, because of TikTok and online conversation. And I don't know, I'm not Danish, but I hear that they just didn't have kind of enough local authors writing romantic fiction to kind of fulfill demand. So this digital publisher set up and very quickly acquired lots of romantic fiction from UK, US, and around the world. And those authors have been really successful there. So we're seeing an opportunity in markets like that didn't really exist before, certainly didn't exist for print. And they're snapping up not just the books that the authors have published more recently, but older titles as well. So they're kind of catching up with their publishing while we've been publishing them here for years. So that's been a really brilliant digital development for those authors, and a really nice kind of income boost for them. Here, I don't tend to go digital first with my authors. That's not to say I absolutely wouldn't. Of course I would. There's some fantastic publishers out there doing it. But I think because I tend to work in slightly less genre-led fiction. So I do have the romantic fiction, of course, but they all have print publishers at the moment. That might change in the future. So we're still seeing ebooks do nice numbers there, but for most of my authors, ebook numbers have sort of plateaued out, and the print editions are still valuable for them. But in the wider world, absolutely, I think, digital publishing is only ever going to be a really kind of fruitful endeavour for many authors, and probably the main source of income versus print and other formats. But yeah, audio books have seen a really nice surge, and I think that's becoming, or has been for a while now, a really interesting area of the market too.
Have you, when it comes to the audiobook rights, because I've spoken to a few other agents about the similar topic, and it can be dependent on agency and, whether there's like a uniform decision on how everything's done or just down to the specific agent. But do you like to hold on to the audiobook rights separate of the print rights?
Well, that's not always our decision. So what we'll tend to do for most, certainly most new fiction and non-fiction projects, is submit to a broad range of publishers. So that's the corporates and independents. And then we will submit to audio publishers alongside. And what we'll do is often, the audio publishers we work with, Belinda, W.F. Howes, are absolutely brilliant. They are so keen and committed. They read the book a lot faster than the print publishers most of the time. And often we get an offer from them for the audio rights before any print offer is on the table, because they read and respond so quickly. Sometimes they know the author because they've published their works before, and sometimes they're coming to it new. And then what we tend to do, and I don't think I'm giving anything away to any other agents by saying this, is just kind of hold that audio offer and say wherever we can separate out those rights, we will. And we'll bring it to the audio publisher, and they trust us to do that, which is why they make the commitment of offering in the first place. It's very hard to hold back audio rights from big corporates like Hachette, like Penguin Random House, like HarperCollins, who will insist that they have those as part of the package of rights that they're buying from us. So when they buy what's called volume rights, they're buying print, ebook, and audio as part of the package. And they stand fairly firm on needing that grant of rights from us in order to offer. So you will say to some publishers, particularly Penguin Random House, I have another audio offer, or I'd like to hold back audio rights. And what you'll get back in response from the editor is, I'm not allowed to offer unless I have audio rights as part of the deal. So what that does, though, is if you have an audio offer on the table, first of all, you have an idea of the value of those. So I think it's really worthwhile attracting the offer and then letting the print publishers know that you have it, and saying, if you want to acquire audio rights as part of the package that I'm granting to you, then you must value those accordingly. We have a clear value placed on those from this independent audio publisher. So please acknowledge that if you're going to offer overall. And in some cases, particularly if you've got a kind of big brand name author, you might have the clout to do something separately. So an example of this is David Nichols, You Are Here. That sold separately to an audio publisher, and then the print rights were published by Hodder at Hachette. And I imagine that because it was David Nichols, his agent managed to pull that one off. But it's very hard if you don't have an author of that sort of level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's with the kind of growth of it and how big it's become as a segment of the industry, it's just become a much more powerful tool of negotiation, basically.
Yeah, I think so. And particularly for some authors who are recognised as narrative voices. Or so, for example, when I saw Diane Abbott's memoir, obviously who should narrate that but Diane Abbott? So there's a certain amount of value that a recognised voice can add to the audio rights. And what I'll do is, even though it went to Viking at Penguin Random House, so of course I was granting them audio rights, we had a conversation about the audio edition right up front at the point that we were talking about them buying the book and us sort of saying, what can you do with it? Diane would narrate clearly. You usually have a separate narration agreement and obviously a separate narration fee for doing that too. So there's a little bit of added value there. But you want to kind of be sure that whoever publishes the audio edition might be able to run some marketing for you on that front, or give you some sample clips to show off online to attract people to the audio edition. And you might want to talk to the publisher about whether Audible and Spotify, those two big audio platforms, are going to flag the book on their homepage, make sure it's visible, that kind of thing. Those can be harder to get commitments on, but certain types of nonfiction have a great audience on those platforms. So maybe you just want to say to whoever's publishing the audio, what can we do to make sure that people see these books on Spotify or Amazon? Is there anything we can do?
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting, and great to hear about these kind of growing areas of the industry, and that there's these new opportunities like in Denmark with them buying up all this romantic fiction. It's great to hear. Like I said, good things happening in the industry so that it's not all doom and gloom all the time.
Definitely. And I mean, yeah, I actually really hate starting anything on negative notes. I didn't immediately mean to go into a whinge about publishers when we started, because I am overwhelmingly optimistic about things. And I also believe that where things change or things are more challenging, everything is cyclical. We are finding it harder at the moment to sell new fiction, for example, but I've been in this industry long enough now to know that these things come and go. And so while everyone might be kind of leaning into more escapist stories, more immersive stories at the moment, that feels like a kind of direct result of how terrible the world is and how difficult the last few years have been. And hopefully things will change again in the wider world, and there'll be an uplift in people going towards more tricky stories or more literary stories, for example. So yeah, for everything there's a season, right? So yes, better things will come.
Exactly, yeah. And these things come around. I mean, it doesn't feel like too long ago that I remember people saying that no one was buying YA, and now YA romantasy is like half of what I hear about every other time someone speaks to me.
Absolutely right.
Getting back onto you, before we go to the desert island, we've obviously covered all this last time, but it was a while ago. So just for everyone listening, as a literary agent, what sorts of genres and authors do you represent?
So I'm fiction and non-fiction for an adult audience only. On the fiction side, I tend to be more contemporary, although since I spoke to you last, I have had my first historical novel published that just came through the submissions pile that I absolutely loved. And also... Hilariously, I've also, having never represented crime or thrillers, one of my journalists decided to write a cozy crime book, which he had such a brilliant idea for it. I could not resist. All about a group of dog walkers who investigate a corpse that they find in the woods. So I now apparently represent crime, which is interesting. But I have to say, and I need to make this very clear on the website, even though I'm quite enjoying kind of a bit of a recent introduction to crime fiction, I'm very much not of the bloody and brutal persuasion. So I like a nice cozy crime with some dogs involved, or I've been reading and devouring all the Ellie Griffiths crime novels, which are fantastic. So my crime is definitely on the more comfortable side than the more visceral side. But I look after some romantic fiction, as I mentioned, something that feels a bit fresh in that area is always welcome. I love stories of families, very much similar to like what I said last time, I imagine. I really like kind of very human relationships and dynamics and that kind of thing. Great love stories. And on the non-fiction side, I look after a little bit of memoir, but I'm not really looking for that at the moment, unless there's a kind of large amount of other writing. So, for example, nature writing, food writing. So if it's memoir with a lot of something else wrapped in, then I'd be interested. And some more practical illustrated books like cookery, a few gift books, that kind of thing. So it's quite broad. It's all on the Blake Friedman website, where we have our own agent profiles as well, if anyone wants any more details.
Yes. And sometimes it can be more useful in some cases for authors to hear what you don't represent. I have been on the website. I have the list here. It is things you don't represent is poetry, YA, children's, fantasy, supernatural, dystopian, sci-fi, thriller, horror, crime, but you kind of touched on that and the nuance there. And then just business, diet or health books.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
That still stands. All of that.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a lot of blurring of genres in fiction at the moment, and that's making it quite hard for us to be specific. So 2 of my authors have decided to write something that is kind of literally leaning into horror. So if we publish those books, then people may find argument with the fact that I say I don't do horror, but we'll have to see. If those get later down the line.
The 2 genres that I think are getting most paired with other genres are romance and horror.
Yeah.
And then I think a subgenre which is getting paired with a lot of things is cozy.
Yes.
Generally, from what I've seen.
The cozy thing is kind of harking back to that desire for escapism at the moment. Yeah. So it's like, I want to escape this world, but make the other world a nice kind of safe place to be, because this current world is not a nice safe place to be. So my feeling is that, cozy is perhaps a little bit reductive for some of the genres we're mixing it with. So for the cozy crime novel, which we're announcing on Wednesday online, the publisher made a little video for it, which is very sweet and charming. And it's got a very jaunty soundtrack. And one of my colleagues who I was showing it to was like, well, there's some very jaunty music for some quite grisly murders. And I was like, what are we doing? By making everything cozy, we're just like, oh, hey, 2 people got killed, but let's put some trumpets over this. It's fine. Yeah. It's classic publishing.
Cozy crime is a trend I am enjoying. I'm obviously the big one being Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club. And then on television, it would be Only Murders in the Building.
Yeah, I love that show. Yeah.
And, I'm really enjoying all of it. But you are kind of right in that it's like, people are dying. Let's have fun and band together and be citizen detectives.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see Steve Martin do a little skit just after he's found a body on his kitchen floor or whatever. Yeah. I mean, we're all aware of what it is and that that's not real life, and that's exactly why we're enjoying it, isn't it? So
yes,
fair enough.
I think it's for me the cozy thing is if you start reading something or watching something that people have told you is cozy, I take that as it's going to be low stakes. It's going to be pretty relaxed. That, if something does happen, like a violent murder, it's not going to be, the focus is almost not on that. That's almost like the MacGuffin of the story. And it's always about found friendship or relationships and family. Yeah, it's about the relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why you're reading it. And that's why, a series like the Ellie Griffiths Ruth Galloway series works so well, is that she'd spread this kind of love story over 16 novels.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. So we're about halfway through the episode. Before we go to the desert island, I just wanted to ask, following on from you saying, the sort of broad strokes of what you represent, are there any particular characters, settings, themes, or whatever it may be that you are more specifically on the hunt for at the moment that you'd love to see popping up in your query inbox?
I think I've seen a lot of novels that play out over quite a short time span. So a few days, a few weeks, a few months, a year maybe. And I'd love to see something that plays out over a longer period of time. So I have a novel on submission at the moment, which is a lifetime, actually, which covers the lifetime of one woman. within this very big kind of family who we also learn about. But I think it's quite rare to find a novel like that, and partly because it's so challenging. Sometimes honing in on a real turning point for your main character, or the day that they meet the person they're going to love, is a lot more straightforward than trying to wrap an entire decades worth of a life into one story. But particularly looking at kind of love and relationships, I'd love to see a relationship play out in full in a novel. And I'm also, I keep thinking about this, and I don't really have the perfect solution for it because I've only seen it done a couple of times. But I love the co-author dual perspective. So Josie Lloyd and Emlyn Rees published their first book when I was a bookseller, and that was a kind of romantic story between the male-female perspectives and falling in love and what that was, and I think they're husband and wife in real life. And they just announced maybe last year that they're writing another book together all these years later, and I was quite intrigued. I don't think it's romance. I think it might be crime. I might have got that very wrong. But actually, I've also read a few books by Nikki French, who are a husband-wife writing team on the crime side. I think it's really rare now to come across two people writing together, but I'm very intrigued by it. So if anyone out there is doing that, I'd really love to hear from you and hear about how you're doing it.
Okay. Yeah, I've had a few co-authors on the podcast, and it's always interesting to see how the dynamic works. Like how they divide out who writes what, if they both write different characters or if it's all the same. It's always interesting.
I've had co-authors writing other kinds of books. So I have at least two kind of co-authored non-fiction books, and actually the whole co-authors as a couple thing completely goes against my rule of never representing a couple. But I am very intrigued by people's relationship dynamics. So I think it's just me being very nosy and kind of wanting some insight on how that might play out on the page. I think it's such a neat kind of intriguing detail to authoring a book to hear that, there are the two people writing it have a relationship in real life, whether that's friendship or more. But also to learn about their writing process and how they handle it. Like, do they pass the book back and forth? Do they come up with their own strands? I'm just fascinated by it. Yeah,
it's an interesting process. And from a couple that I've spoken to, I guess it'll vary so hugely depending on the authors, the editors, the agents. But yeah, there's almost less... because there's two people, they're bouncing ideas off each other and editing each other the entire time. They often get to a more finished point quicker than an author by themselves would, because they don't get so trapped to it all the time, but they're not so close to it the whole time. So they can be much more analytical about the other's writing, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And the other person can kind of keep them moving when they might feel a bit stuck, maybe. Yes, exactly. So, yeah. I have an author who writes literary fiction by herself, who writes romantic fiction with her husband and publishes it on Amazon. And so the two of them have done that for years, and they've kind of spent half their day co-writing fiction to self-publish on Amazon to actually earn an income, and then in the other half of the day working on their literary fiction, which is more traditionally published by a conventional publisher. So I think they do that, where they write a short story and then they hand it to each other at the end of the day and get each other to kind of feedback on it. But that's a hugely trusting relationship as well. I'm kind of in awe of it. I'm sure a therapist would love that to hear that couples are writing stories together and really exposing their feelings in that way. Absolutely. I want to be not the therapist, but the person who gets a little bit of nosy insight into the dynamics of that relationship, basically. Yeah. So we're at that point of the episode where normally I would ship you off to the desert island and ask you what book you would hope to have with you if you were stranded there, but you've already been. Do you remember what you chose last time you were on?
I think I chose something that was a kind of anthology that was a total cop-out from the question. Was that right?
You chose the biggest, yeah. I think you described it as whatever the biggest collective works of poetry you could find was by either Mary Oliver or Emily Dickinson.
Yes. I mean, I have the right to change my mind on things, right? So
yes, of course.
I mean, I don't know. One of my favourite books of all time is Heartburn by Nora Ephron. So I would pick that many times over any other book, I think.
Okay.
If I took a book in print, could I also take it in audio as well?
Sure. Yeah, it's the same words.
Yeah. So it's Meryl Streep narrating Heartburn.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I would like it in audiobook too.
That's great.
She would be a great companion and a great comfort, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Meryl Streep, an absolute legend.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. That's a fun choice, and the audiobook is a fun twist on it too.
Yeah, great.
So, next up, we are going to get into submissions, queries, cover letters, and all that fun stuff. That will be in the extended episode available on patreon.com/rightandwrong.
Yeah, and this time around, I didn't have some hell cold that made my voice 2 octaves lower. So at the very least, you'd hear a different kind of voice. Indeed.
And a much healthier episode.
Yes.
For anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Juliet is doing, you can find her on Blue Sky at Juliet Pickering or on Instagram at Juliet Represents. And if you're thinking of querying Juliet or any of the team over at Blake Friedman, you can find everything you need, including the guidelines and what each of the agents is looking for at blakefriedman.co.uk. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe, join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes, and check out my other podcasts, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Juliet, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode. Shout out time. One of my amazing patrons, Lee Foxton, is querying their debut novel. It's a family drama, commercial fiction along the lines of Jojo Moyes and David Nichols. Fingers crossed, I am rooting for you. Good luck.